State legislatures, public schools, colleges, and professional sports continue to grapple with whether trans people should be allowed to compete on sports teams that have historically been restricted to cisgender individuals. And in recent years, the restroom issue has once again reared its ugly head. More than a dozen states and the U.S. Congress restrict the use of public restrooms by trans people to those designated for the gender they were assigned at birth. Is the current rash of restrictions on transgender people a backlash against a growing transgender rights movement? And if so, how is this movement likely to fare under a Trump administration? Here to give us some insights into these issues is Red Washburn, professor of English and Women and Gender Studies at Kingsborough Community College and the CUNY Graduate Center. Welcome. You read and hear about so much about transgender issues happening now. Why is it happening now?
For me, I think about these issues historically, about the cultural wars and how these issues are often used as scapegoats for larger systemic inequalities in the world. I think a lot of the gains that have happened during the Biden administration are basically getting rolled back under the Trump administration. And it's easy to blame trans people for larger problems in the world, to distract from things connected to the economy, jobs, housing inequality, a number of issues, climate crisis. I also just think that it's not a coincidence that this is happening now that people have gain rights, such as the ability to change your name, to change your pronouns, to use a bathroom, to play sports, to be involved in basic societal rights for every human being. So I feel like a lot of these issues are not current fads. The Stonewall movement and the Compton cafeteria riots happened in the 60s. A lot of time has been taken to really try and make correctives even into the academy, with trans studies booming in the 90s, the rise of women and gender studies programs also during this time, after social movements in the 60s, Black studies, Latinx studies, Asian American studies, basically any area studies programs. So I don't think it's a coincidence it's happening now. I think this also happened with abortion, reproductive rights, the rise of the movement for Black Lives during the pandemic, what some people call the double pandemic times. So I think a lot of the resistance that happened that created legislation, created the right to implement basic human rights for people, is just trying to get rolled back.
Yeah. I talked about all the states that have banned gender-affirming therapy for transgender youth. How big a problem is that? Is that a really onerous thing for young transgender youth?
For me, any kind of issue connected to healthcare for anybody, not just trans youth, is extremely essential for survival. For trans youth in particular, I think it's a matter of them probably not killing themselves, because they need to have things that validate who they are. Bullying in schools has always been a problem, and without healthcare and without a recognition that they have a right to exist and to be who they are, it becomes a serious mental health issue for people. In general, LGBTQ plus people have higher rates of anxiety and depression than cisgender and heterosexual people. And I think this is true for any marginalized person, people experiencing interlocking oppressions such as racism, classism, homophobia, transphobia, all these different issues. Youth should be able to make decisions about their bodies. It's an autonomy decision for me.
Is there a point at which it becomes too late to begin gender-affirming therapy? I mean, you look at, say, a boy who identifies as female. Is it too late if you wait until after that person's voice has changed? Or is there a point where it becomes too late?
I mean, I think this is a good question. For me, I don't think it's ever too late to make decisions about who you are, your identity, your body, your own decisions about how you want to live your life. But I think you pose a really good point, which is that it is harder sometimes for people in terms of their mental health if they start later. So I think about myself, I've always been gender nonconforming, and had I had access to healthcare, I probably would have done things to preserve my neck instead of like binding. I probably would have had top surgery earlier. So I think it does take a toll on certain people's bodies depending on how they're presenting themselves and how they're choosing to live their lives.
So what will happen if the Supreme Court upholds these restrictions?
I mean, I think a lot of people are going to really suffer mentally and physically. I think a lot of people are going to be killed or they're going to kill themselves. I think part of the issue for me is about somebody is making a decision that is not the person. It's a politician in this case. And I always feel like this should be a decision that is chosen by children, their parents or guardians, their doctors, the people who are experts in their lives and in their bodies, not politicians.
My name is Freya. I am 16 years old. I have been on estrogen since I was 14, and I know that I'm very privileged to be able to say that. But in the same breath, I can say that I am scared for myself, for my own health care, and for all of the other people like me. And I have one message to my kinfolk, because that's what we are. All the people who are here and are like me and are showing up willing to fight for our own rights or the rights of the people that we love and care about, don't let them win.
Transgender participation in sports is a huge issue, especially regarding transgender females who want to compete on girls' sports teams. My sense is that it's more of an issue with high school sports, because you have all of these soccer mom and dad types who are just crazy anyway about sports. And where does it's Title IX, where does it come down on transgender girls playing on girls' teams?
I mean, I think for me, this is also an issue of, do you want someone to participate in life? I mean, do you want someone to participate in activities that will help not just them, but also the society in which they live? Sports are a really good way to relieve stress, to produce community, to deny access to the right to be involved in that is discrimination. And this biology argument is historically situated as well. Like, there's many times where people would measure women's brain sizes or measure indigenous people's brains and their bodies, or black women's genitalia or whatever. And I think it's never a question of biology. Hormones, for instance, allowing someone to excel more in sports, it's an issue for me about the social meanings ascribed to biology, because there are so many ways people can participate in sports. And for me, that's just an issue of not just self-determination to participate in the way that you want to as a human being, but also just to be, cherished and recognized, to be a part of that community. And however people want to divide it is their own decision. I think the larger issue is gender's not binary. So many people have talked about this, even biologists. I'm thinking of somebody like Anne Fausto Sterling. Even biologically, she talks about 1% of people are intersex. What do you do with that? Also, she talks about 5 different biological genders on top of all the different ways people do gender, which I think is about expression and freedom. So for me, it's really just about people's right to exist and participate in society.
I gather that the NCAA, which regulates college sports, or at least the bigger colleges, is much more lenient about transgenders competing in sports. Is that your understanding?
I don't know enough about that particular example, but I can say that that's a step in the right direction, if that's true. And watching like the WNBA, for instance, there's a lot of muscular women, and I feel like some of that is class and race bound in addition to gender bound stereotypes about how people show up to perform a sport. So I think, for instance, that could be a way to, I don't know, stimulate a discussion around if it can exist in this way, why can't it exist in high schools, or why can't it exist in, junior school or for kindergartners or whatever.
Yeah, I would think it's much less of an issue in women's professional basketball, just for that,
Yeah.
just for that reason. Now President Biden had issued some administrative rules. I guess they were for Title IX, making sure that Title IX did apply not just to gender, biological gender, but to sexual orientation. I imagine those rules are going to be threatened under the Trump administration.
Having watched the coverage of the election, it seems like there is definitely going to be massive repression targeted against LGBTQ people, against immigrants, against a number of people. Even people talk about this with the military too. Like, do you want people to participate or not? And the larger issue is that, like, we can't be erased. We're not going to be erased. It's just, do we want to keep pushing back against this systemic, I would say it's a genocide of sorts.
Yeah. How about the fairness issue? Where you have daughters who are participating on the high school soccer team, and along comes a transgender young woman, who wants to compete. And I guess the concern is that it sets up an unfair kind of competition. I mean, that seems to be the big argument. Mm-hmm. How do you respond to that?
I mean, I think that the larger question that I have is around fairness for whom? Because, like, okay, if I use myself as an example, I have had high testosterone my whole life. I have polycystic ovaries. I probably have more like testosterone than some boys. And, I had a beard before I had a beard. I just shaved it every day. And did that put me at an unfair advantage to playing women's sports, which I used to. I used to play basketball. I used to play softball. I used to be mad that I had to play softball because I wanted to play baseball because my hands are small and I wanted a smaller ball. But I think that, the biology question is tricky because we have to look at the social meanings attached to them. And I would argue that trans women probably have higher estrogen than most girls because they're taking hormones. And I'm not sure that puts them at an unfair advantage. And I think the larger issue is, like, how do we imagine recreation in a way that is more gender expansive? And why this is such an issue. Like, even historically, if we think about other things historically, people have said this about work, about access to water fountains for Black people in this country. They have said this about all kinds of things in the past. And this kind of division, whether it's the intersection of race, class, and gender, or if we're talking specifically about isolating something, like, for instance, if we're isolating gender in this case, or we're isolating, like, if we, for instance, talk about, like, Black people not having the right to go to school, like, is that an issue of fairness? I don't think so. I think it's about how people can participate in a society that embraces respect for difference, diversity, knowing other cultures, and, like, embracing a different sense of community.
The bathroom issue. The bathroom issue always seems to come up when you're talking about gender discrimination. It came up when you were talking about integrating women into the armed services and the male military academies, when we're talking about integrating women into formerly men's colleges. And 12 states have passed bans on transgender females using girls' bathrooms in public schools. So what's with the bathrooms? Why are people get so emotional about bathrooms?
I don't know. I mean, I think like just let people go to the bathroom. Like I joke about this in my classes because people always want to talk about bathrooms. I'm like, can we talk about a utopia instead? You know, can we talk about a new world? But bathrooms are important. You know, like people need to go to the bathroom. Denying people access to the bathroom causes all kinds of health problems, including all kinds of kidney problems. I know so many.
Well, they're not denying access to the bathroom, but they're denying access to certain bathrooms.
Right, but what happens is trans people don't go to the bathroom then. We hold it in, and it hurts our kidneys, and then we develop all kinds of health issues. People talk about tranny bladder, holding your bladder when you're in the public sphere. And
so if you're the principal of a New York City high school, what would be your preferred policy regarding transgenders and bathrooms?
I would put up a sign on the doors that had urinals or stalls, and people could choose what they needed to use. And I would make all the bathrooms available to everybody so they could just go to the bathroom. If trans people are forced to go into a bathroom for them assigned by their sex birth, then they're not going to go to the bathroom, or they're probably going to get bullied, especially like trans femmes, trans women in particular who don't pass. Like, I pass as a transgender man, and I could go to the bathroom. When I wasn't on hormones, I wouldn't use the men's room. When I went to the women's room, people would call security on me all the time.
Yeah. There have been many civil rights movements in this country. The abolitionist movement, women's suffrage movement, the civil rights movement of the 60s, the modern women's rights movement, the gay rights movements, and all of them have been dramatic and included some violence at times. The transgender rights movement, can you give me some sense of how big a movement is and how it's being conducted?
Most social movements in this country have been intersectional by nature. So for instance, there have always been trans people involved in civil rights struggles and feminist struggles. The feminist movement has really helped the gains of LGBT struggles. So that, people have the anti-war movement, the prison abolition movement. There's been tons of trans people in those movements. But I think when people talk about like a trans movement, this is something that in the mainstream discourse seems new, but it actually hasn't been. It's just been imagined differently. You had mentioned the number of bills that have come up, and like for instance, in 2021, I think there was about 100+ bills around trans healthcare, bathrooms, sports, and now there's like over 600. So like, what is the recent increase? For me, it's like somewhat similar to like, has crime increased? Why are there so many people incarcerated, right? Or is it that we're repressing people more? Our police repressing people more? So I think the larger issue is that the trans movement has taken speed in the sense that there is more mainstream recognition of it. It has built solidarity across different countries. So for instance, I was in Ireland this summer, and there was the biggest trans pride march that there has ever been. There's not even a trans pride march here. There's all kinds of different marches here. There's the Dyke March, there's the larger Queer Liberation March, and the bigger corporate, Pride March. But that pride was huge, and then in the UK it's pretty huge too. And they work with people in the US, and they work with people in different countries. So I think it's gotten bigger because there's been a lot more repression, especially around access to hormones, to healthcare, to surgery, to changing your name, to using bathrooms. So I think that the trans movement's only going to get bigger under Trump. you know.
Well, they certainly continue to add letters to the acronym. I mean, it's LGBTQ. This is, what's next?
I mean, at
Is
this
there-
point, it's like the whole alphabet: LGBTQIA plus. You know, like, yeah. I mean, I think that's great, though. I love that people are always finding other ways to identify their gender, or their,
And
their
I've
sexuality.
noticed, for instance, I went to the installation of my undergraduate school's president back in the fall. It's a formerly all-women's school that is now totally open to essentially everybody. But everybody who got up, gave their pronouns. I am so-and-so, I use her, she, them, whatever. That was sort of new to me. So I guess, as you say, that does show a greater recognition that there is a lot of variety in society and that everybody should be included. Some states have banned public schools from even talking about homosexuality, transgender issues, diversity, race in the classroom. What do you want to say about that?
I think it's deeply unjust. I mean, I was just talking to a colleague about what's going to happen to critical race studies, what's going to happen to LGBTQ studies. The National Women's Studies Association is already putting out statements to defend the state of the field. When I was the editor of WSQ, we did a whole issue on 50 years of women and gender studies, and we're not going back. We're not going back to an academy that doesn't have those things. We're not going back to an education system that doesn't have those things. I think that it might get to the point where things are defunded, but like anything else, we're going to keep doing this work because we have no other choice. I think about this even with my own work. Like, I'm working on a book now that's on trans and non-binary literature, performance and art, and I'm teaching a class here at the Grad Center. I'm thinking about, like, are they just gonna like burn that book when it comes out? Are they going to cancel this class? No, we're gonna keep doing this work because we don't have a choice. We're not gonna sit there and we're not gonna be written out of existence. I think that we're gonna have a lot of work to do, though. I think we're gonna have to really try and build support across communities of difference, and that's hard because, as you mentioned, like earlier, everything is like this scapegoating, like blaming immigrants for this or blaming like LGBTQ people for this. And I think the larger issue is like, how do we stand together to create a better world? And that includes things like everyone having health care, and this, I would argue, free health care. I want CUNY to be free. I saw Governor Hochul's statement about freeing CUNY. I would love CUNY to be free. It should be free. I think all education should be free. I think everyone should have a right to housing and shelter. Everyone should have access to food. Like, I can't believe we live in a world where people are suffering the way they are. So how do we get back to those principles about what it means to be a human?
How about political organization by the transgender community?
Do you mean in terms of like organizing?
Yeah, I guess so. Or targeting certain officials or candidates. Is there a lot of that going on?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, any kind of organizing, especially in New York City, that's happening is happening in multiple areas of society. So I think at this point, for instance, people are really, really like, adamant about reducing hate crimes. Hate crimes have gone up in New York City, particularly, with BIPOC trans femmes. And every day they have, the Trans Day of Remembrance for all these people who were murdered. There's a lot going on still around prisons and the number of trans people who are in prison because they can't find work and they have to do things that, are quote unquote illegal to survive.
And who I would think would be in some physical danger.
And physical danger, yeah, of course, yeah. They're putting their lives at risk doing the work that they're doing. I think there's a lot of issues that are happening now, particularly around connections that I think are really interesting around the intersections of trans and feminist communities around reproductive health care and also trans health care. This larger issue around having access to your body.
Well, it's certainly, you said it's not actually new, but it is emerging in the public eye as a new civil rights movement.
Absolutely.
So we're going to be hearing a lot more about it. Thank you for bringing us sort of up to date on what's going on and what it's all about and why it's important.
Thank you for your work, Cheryl.
I'm afraid we're out of time. I'd like to thank Red Washburn, Professor of English and Women and Gender Studies at Kingsborough Community College and the CUNY Graduate Center, for joining me today. To learn about our upcoming shows, you can follow us on Instagram at One2One CUNY TV. And you can watch the show on the go by downloading the CUNY TV app. For the City University of New York and One2One, I'm Cheryl McCarthy.